What was I going to ask you? I was going to ask you your superpower. Okay, context is, we asked that question in, what episode is this? This is?
In episode 15.
Okay, this is 17. So it was 15, yeah. When we asked our first guest that question.
Yes.
So then I thought about it and I asked Sandra about it. And, we just talked about it generally. And she asked me, what's yours, right?
Yeah.
And I told her it changes over time. And in fact, the first time I ever really thought about it was in college, because we used to write essays, and it's like I'm doing the essay the night before it's due.
Yes.
And so the superpower I really, really wanted at the time was the ability to snap my fingers, and whatever essay I would have written in 10 hours, 20 hours, a week, whatever it is, it automatically just gets produced right there and then. It's a very specific niche power, but it was the one I wanted more than anything else.
But specifically for essays, nothing else.
Specifically, yeah. I mean, I guess it could be anything. It could be a book, an article, a work product, whatever it is. But you just snap, and it's not like it's gonna be better than you would have written it. It's literally
exactly
the
what
best
you would
thing
have
you would have
written
done
in the circumstances.
Right there, in that very second. So even this episode, we could just snap. It's already
and
recorded.
Then we're done.
It's ready. So I guess it could
snap again all the others. And then
that was the power I really wanted. I mean, then it changes over time. Now it's teleportation for sure. Because I think teleportation is a better power than flying for me, because flying is so, you're out there, everyone's like, oh my God, Tim's flying. It's a whole thing. It's a spectacle. You could run into things, whatever. Someone could shoot you down. It's a whole thing. But when you teleport, instantly you're there, and you don't have to travel. You don't have to pack. You don't have to stand in lines and go through security and I don't really like road trips. I know you love road trips, but being stuck in a place for a long time traveling, it's something I don't really enjoy. But I love the experience of being in a new place. So I'd love to teleport.
Interesting.
Yeah. Plus, a lot of people I really care about are often very far away.
Yeah.
So it would be really good to get close to them. Just
like to hang out, have breakfast. Yeah. Lunch there.
And then you're done.
Catch up, be at all the birthdays. You never have to miss anything.
Hello and welcome back to the Full Scale Podcast. I am your host, Adrian Twatwa. I'm joined by my co-host, as always, Timothy Mukiti. Tim, how are you today?
Fine, thank you. How are you doing?
Good. I'm doing well. Glad to be back. God is good. We are highly favored, and we're back for episode 17, where we're talking about implementing corporate governance in startups. So in last week's episode, we talked about what is corporate governance, how does it work, what are the pillars and principles of corporate governance, the benefits of implementing good corporate governance, key roles, as well as some examples of bad corporate governance and how that didn't work out for some companies in the past. So we promised in that episode that we'll have a separate episode, which is today's episode, where we talk about just how you can go about implementing good corporate governance in your startup. So very practical, actionable tips, steps and ways that you can implement this in your startup. So on a day-to-day basis. This is sort of the content we really strive to provide, something that you can actually use in your day-to-day life. And hopefully that's what you get out of this episode. There are very many points we're going to cover in today's episode, so we're eager to get right into it. But before we do, just two things to flag right at the top. One is, this is not an exhaustive list of ways to implement corporate governance or good corporate governance in your business. Corporate governance is an evolving topic. It's something that changes. Your business is changing, where you're at the beginning versus later on. So corporate governance looks different for companies, but what we're going to go through here is just simple, general ways that almost any company really can implement good corporate governance practices in their business. The second thing I'll flag is that, as always, this is not legal advice. We're doing our best to give you actionable tips, things that you can do in your day-to-day running of your business. But these are just our views, things that we've seen work in other businesses, and just our opinions. This is not legal advice. Do not consider it legal advice. If you want legal advice, which you should take, you should go seek your legal advisors, talk to your trusted lawyers, talk to Mukiti advocates, and take their advice and apply it to your very specific situation. Not legal advice. So let's get right into it. Tim, do you want to start us off with your first sort of actionable way or ways to implement corporate governance in your business?
Yeah, sure. So there are various ways in which you can, implement corporate governance, and we will be discussing a couple of them. Maybe I will get us started on the incorporation bit. Mm-hmm. So the first step to implementing good corporate governance is ensuring that you're properly incorporated. this means that you choose the best entity for your business goals, understanding what business goals you'd want to accomplish, and the business entity that would enable you to accomplish those goals with ease. Understanding what are the compliance requirements for a specific structure you pick, what are the regulatory concerns around it, and how do you exactly run around it? How equally does it apply to your business? You will recall in episode 3, in episode 3, we discussed the pros and cons of different structures.
Yeah.
You might want to have a look at that to also just get a bit of the background on that. And it's advisable, again, for the right structure you undertake for your business to seek legal advice, so that you're able to understand how exactly it looks and how compliance will look like for your business. Equally, it's important to ensure that your business is duly registered in compliance with the laws and regulations. It has the licenses and permits that are required. It has filed its returns that are required and under the respective law it operates under. And once you've identified the best entity, you should have the same registered with the applicable registry, with the right details for the business, and has obtained all, like I've just said, the business should have obtained all the licenses and permits that are required to do the business, and it has filed all the returns. This may vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but ideally, that's usually the first step of good corporate governance, ensuring that the entity that is doing business is properly incorporated, properly registered, and achieves the purpose that it's intended to achieve for the business. Yeah.
Awesome. Amazing. So, I mean, that's really the starting point, right? If you're not incorporated, structured correctly, you're not abiding by the laws that govern, you're already doing things wrong, right? So I think that's a great place to start us off. I'll kick us off with another one, which we talked about just as early as last week's episode, which is the importance of a strong board. We talked about how a board fits in. A board is the shareholders pick the board. The board is the one that oversees how the business is being run, and they put in place people to do the day-to-day running of the business. So having a board that is really strong and capable is really, it's the primary force determining good corporate governance, or corporate governance at all in the business. So things that you should consider when you're picking a board. So first of all, have a board, and then make sure that it's a strong board of directors. So you want diverse expertise. So we talked about this, right? You need to have someone who, first of all, has industry expertise, right? So if we are doing our fitness app, but we don't have anyone on the board that has ever done anything technological, any sort of app-based thing, or anything in the fitness world, or anything in the industry that we're working in, then we're missing a key component in terms of someone who has that voice and that skill set at the board level.
Yes.
Industry expertise, financial expertise. These are your accountants, people who know how a business is run, and they can tell you what's going wrong in the books and records, or the way that you're accounting for income, revenue, expenses, all of that. Your legal and regulatory expertise. You should probably have a lawyer on the board. I think that's always helpful. Someone who has experience in marketing and sales, HR, someone who has experience scaling. We talked about this last week with Collins, or 2 weeks ago, with Collins Muriuki. He talked about how when they're scaling into other parts of Africa, they're looking for people who have done scaling in other jurisdictions as well. Whether they failed or succeeded, there's lessons learned there that they can bring and impart to the business and make the business successful in scaling.
Exactly.
And again, learn from their mistakes and do it better than they even did in the past.
Yeah.
Having that type of skill set on the board it's really, really important. People who are aligned with your company's vision, that's another important one to have on the board. So if your vision is to be the premier fitness app in Africa in 10 years, but there's someone on the board who doesn't believe in fitness apps at all and doesn't believe that this is going anywhere, then there's a misalignment there. They're not going to contribute in the way that they should towards the company's success. Yeah. Someone who's a team player. Your board members should be team players. They should be people who are willing to work together, happy to work together, and prioritize the business ahead of their individual success, right? People who have strong ethics and integrity. Again, another one. The tone at the top sets the tone all the way, right? So if your people on the board do not have ethics and integrity as something that they value, odds are the rest of the business won't. So only other thing I'd mention is the importance of independent directors. We mentioned people who are impartial and can give you unbiased opinions and advice in the way that you're running the business and can guide it in that way. But we also talked about independent directors, capital I, capital D, who they don't have any material or financial ties to the business. They're not employees. They don't have significant financial ties. They don't have any family relations in the business. They're completely impartial. Those having one or two of those people on the board, and sometimes it's actually a requirement under the law, right? In certain jurisdictions or in certain industries, having those people on the board is super important because they can always be that voice of reason. They can always be the people to vouch for the minority shareholders' rights. So, and just give you that objectivity. So, and also perhaps to periodically change the board. The board shouldn't be static from when you started the company till the 10th year or the 15th or 20th year. Perhaps you should be changing the board because the business is changing and it's evolving and what it's offering is changing. So even the complexion of the people on the board and what they have to offer should perhaps also change to match the trajectory of the company. I think that's all on boards. Tim, maybe you can take us on to the next one, maybe about decision making and how that should work.
Yeah, so we've discussed the incorporation structures. The second one is building a board, which Adrian has taken us through. And now the third, a practical step that you should implement for purposes of good corporate governance is having a clear decision-making structure, which of course makes it easier for you to know when decisions are made and when opinions are given. You know, in a business, sometimes if everybody is capable of giving decisions, it's hard to know what direction to take. If you know where decisions come from, now at that point you're able to distinguish between a decision that has been made that should be implemented, and an opinion that has been given or a suggestion that can be considered. So, for purposes of having a clear decision-making structure, it's important to have defined roles and responsibilities. So, which requires that you need to have a clearly defined, you basically need to clearly define who is responsible for what within the business. This includes identifying decision makers for day-to-day decisions and anyone who manages finances and key responsibilities. So, of course, there's a split between day-to-day decision-making of a business and strategic decision-making. Strategic decision-making will sit probably ideally with the board, which will make strategic decision. But the board will not be there to implement day-to-day decision. So it's important to identify who makes decisions within the two categories, day-to-day decision-making, and even within the day-to-day decision-making of the business, what are the structures, what are the hierarchies of who makes what decision and who takes responsibility for what decisions.
Yeah, completely agree. And even if that strategy is being proposed, say, by the CEO, right? Yeah. It's still going to get checked by the board. Say, is this the right strategy for the business?
Exactly. It's correct. Still being will have to be checked by the board and approved. So, if roles and responsibilities are ambiguous, you tend to end up in a confusion, and that is not good for the business. It will not be able to move, and worse still, you'll end up with people duplicating efforts. So where one person does this, another one is doing exactly the same thing. So it's not an efficient way of deploying the company's or the business's resources if you don't have a clear decision-making process and accountability around the decision-making. Related to having a structure for clear decision-making and accountability for decisions, you need to have a good way of documenting decisions. Decisions made by the business ideally should be consistently documented and properly documented such that they can be accessed at a future date.
Okay.
As part of the historical data of the business. So a simple one could be keeping a simple log of minutes of ordinary decisions that are made, and also making sure all agreements made, you don't have instances where agreements were made. I mean, we always make this joke in this podcast where decisions are made on WhatsApp.
Yeah.
Can we buy this car? Yes. Good. Buying it. You get. And then it's hard to track how the decisions were made. It's hard to also have a form of accountability. So either, if, at the very least, even if you're tracking your decisions, documenting your decisions through WhatsApp chats, it's better than not documenting them, first of all. But ideally, you should have a more organized way of making decisions for the business. And and making sure that the same, they are tracked and they can be found, and they can build a historical process of how the decisions were made. And that should be as clear as a decision-making process.
Yeah.
Such that there's no confusion of the decision was made. Maybe the decision was like, let's acquire company X if the profit levels are at W. But the person who goes and takes the notes, writes it, let's acquire company X. That's not proper record keeping, because if I was to come to the business 10 years later and I'm saying, let's acquire company X, I might be tempted actually to proceed, because there is no proper documentation of how exactly the decision was made.
Yeah, if it exists at all, because someone could have cleared their chat. And then there's no record at all.
Indeed. So yeah, that's on decision making. Perhaps you can take us through financial transparency and controls.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the most important ones, and it's one that we see the most often. So the first one is keeping separate bank accounts. We see this so many times where you're a business, you're a startup founder, you started your business, and you have your bank account, your personal bank account. You start receiving payments for your business in your personal bank account. You start invoicing people and paying your suppliers through your personal business account. Of course, it's a convenient way to begin, because you don't want to do too many things at a go. You're focusing your efforts where you think it really matters as early as you can. But the problem is, and especially for lawyers, we actually have this, it's an ethical thing that you can't do, this commingling of funds, right? So I have funds for the business, I have my personal funds, and they're commingled. They're all in the same account. It's hard to really say which shilling or which dollar belongs to who. Is it mine or is it the business's? The problem with this arises in a few ways. One is, let's say I owe someone $100,000, 100,000 shillings. As part of a business, right? The business owes money, owes 100,000 shillings to someone. Then that person sues and takes me to court and says, we need 100,000 shillings from this person. They go, I tell them I don't have money in my bank account. Actually, the company's broke. But then they check the bank account, it's my personal account, and they see all this money and they say, well, there's money here. And I say, well, actually, it's not the business's account, it's my account. They say, well, how do we know what's what? The money's there. That's what we know.
Yes.
So you could face legal risks where they attach or they take the money that should be yours, or perhaps maybe it is yours. How do we know, right? That's the issue that you run against. So making sure that those assets are clearly separated, so that if a creditor ever came after the business, they should only go after the business, and that liability should stick to the business. It shouldn't extend to your personal bank account. But then there's also other record keeping issues. So taxes. So you're trying to file taxes. You say the business made this much in income, and they ask you, show us a bank statement. The bank statement is showing completely different things. How are you going to tell them this was for the business, this was for a personal M-Pesa transaction that came in for me? So it's, again, trying to separate those things so that there's always accountability and it's very clear what money belongs to the business versus what belongs to you. And another one is, you as the business runner, as the founder, could be the issue. You could end up mismanaging these funds. So you could be on a night out having a good time with your boys or your girls.
Yeah, you
start swiping.
You start swiping capital. You start drinking capital.
Exactly. Start making M-Pesa transactions. Then in the morning you discover, oh, actually, I didn't have money to spend. That was all the business's money. That was the payment from the customers that came in, and I've already used it all. So you risk mismanaging company finances if everything's all in one place.
But if you have such a problem, I'm not sure your startup will survive anyway.
But it would be a good problem not to have, right? On top of all the other things you're dealing with.
Yes.
That's one less thing to deal with. Yeah. So that's just separating your finances, the business and the personal finances. Also just record keeping and financial reporting. So you should regularly be tracking your income, your expenses, your cash flow in the most basic ways. It doesn't have to be a super complicated accounting software or having accountants on staff. It could be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet where you track how much money is coming in, how much money is going out, what's our burn rate, how much are we spending on inventory, just making sure you're keeping track of things, because what doesn't get measured doesn't get managed. And that's a famous quote from someone. You can look it up. They'll show you who said it. It's not me, but someone smarter than me said, what doesn't get measured doesn't get managed. And that's very true. If you're not measuring if you're trying to get more fit and you're not measuring sort of your weight or your calories or whatever other metrics go into your healthy lifestyle, it's going to be very hard to keep track of where you are and if you're making progress, right?
Indeed.
So if you're not tracking the business's financial health, how will you know if the business is doing well or not?
Yep.
This also ties in with budgeting. So if you don't have a budget, a very basic budget for the business, how do you know if you're managing costs well? How do you know if you have money, if there's an emergency or something else that comes up? How do you know how much you can actually afford to be spending on acquiring new customers and how much you should be keeping in the bank account? It's very hard to manage all of that if you don't measure it actively and you don't budget. So, I mean, that's also a personal financial tip, right? So if you as an individual are not budgeting your money, it's hard to keep track of what you're spending on. Yep. So basic financial reporting and just budgeting and forecasting, so you know what you should be planning for in terms of growth, where you should be putting your money and how much money you have. That's financial stuff. Maybe Tim, you could talk to us about risk management.
Yes, happy to take us through risk management. But even before I go to risk management, I think as you're going through, financial discipline and good financial order for corporate governance, I think it's extremely important, especially for startups.
Yeah,
because some of those problems where there's commingling of funds, lack of record keeping, poor budgeting and forecasting, and poor financial reporting tends to be problems that you find a lot with young or beginning, startups and at the earlier stages. And it just saves you a lot of headache. It even helps you manage the business better once you have a clear understanding around that. So I think that one is a gem, especially for startups.
Awesome.
On risk management, so of course, a business will needs to identify the potential risks that relate to it, whether it's existential risks, whether it's competitive risks, whether it's things like fire risks or risks of acts of God,
COVID.
Exactly, things that are totally beyond your control.
Yeah,
you need, number one, the first step about risk management is identifying the key risks. Okay, of course, there are some risks that will be beyond you in terms of establishing the possibility of them. Because, for example, I don't think any business in 2019 or 2018, for example, let's take it back to 2018, would have sat down and foreseen a COVID situation, where flights are grounded, nobody's flying, where people are staying at home and they're walking around in masks. Maybe you could. We had watched a few movies of such, apocalypse and such things. But beyond that, there's a lot of other risks that you can identify. For example, if you have a building where you have the office, you have a fire risk, for example.
Yeah.
The other one would be risk of theft.
Yep.
You could have the risk of if you're in Nairobi a few years ago, maybe there's a risk of flooding. But the number one step is to recognize the biggest risk of your business, such as market competition. There's equally something like regulatory changes. If you're operating in a heavily regulated industry, you need to identify the regulatory risk, whether it is in terms of potential changes in regulatory posture, or it could be sanctions that could come if you don't comply.
Yeah.
It could be that if you don't comply with a particular thing, your business is gone. So you need to identify that and have a basic plan to how to manage them. So number one, identify the risk. Then number two, have a basic plan on how to manage the risks. And even have, as part of having a clear decision-making structure, you need to know who makes decisions about what risks.
Yeah.
If the risk attaches or there's, we're close to risk, you need to know who is supposed to make what decision. So that is an accountability in terms of managing the risks. Then, of course, mitigating the risks now. You have a plan of how to manage the risk. You can mitigate the risk. And one of the most simple way to mitigate the risk is getting insurance cover.
Yeah.
And you could get insurance cover for so many things. For some of them, you may not get. You may not get an insurance cover for a regulatory risk, but you could get insurance cover for fire risk, theft. And if you're in professional services, you can get a professional indemnity.
Yeah,
which
malpractice,
sort of for any negligence that could happen. So in that way, you're managing risks. But that's key for businesses.
Even I think political risk now, there's like insurance for that, right? Like things like Mandamano, or something happens, you never know.
Yeah, I've seen there are such covers, but they're very the what do you call it? the limitations are so many,
They don't pay.
Yeah.
Hey, I don't
the
know.
risk of getting paid, I don't know. Yeah. But ideally, you're better off with an insurance, which you can start arguing with the insurance company whether you can be paid, as opposed to just like, okay, fine, I'm here, I've lost it. Yeah,
get insured.
Yeah, get insured. So
okay.
Ed, would you want to take us through ethics and compliance?
Sure. So this one, I guess the best way I think of explaining this is, so ethical guidelines and just complying with law. So first of all, you should have some sort of code of conduct for your business. How is business conducted here? We talked about last week, do people do the same thing when the boss is around versus when the boss is not around? Mm-hmm. People should know this is the way business is done here. There should be instructions, steps, policies in place as to this is the way that business is done in this business. From the moment a customer walks in, is the customer welcomed? How should they be greeted and talked to? Should it be kindly? Should it be rudely? So speak kindly to the customer, offer them a seat, offer them something to drink or something, and then perhaps take their details. Maybe there's a standard form that a customer is supposed to fill out with standard requirements, maybe things we're required to do by law, as well as going above and beyond. How are those details then secured in line with data privacy laws and other policies internally? Mm-hmm. When the customer has left, how long should it be before we reach out to them? What's the turnaround time for providing them with the service? Or when emails come in, what's the turnaround time for when we respond to all queries and requests? So there should be ways that we do business here. Whatever your business is, there should be standard procedures, standard operating procedures. Within that should be ethical behavior, right? Yeah. Fair treatment of employees, of customers, of anyone that you're dealing with. Honesty in your dealings, right? When we receive money, we should honestly account for it and record it as such. Mm-hmm. We should be having integrity in the way that we deal with our customers. I saw something recently that it's a text. It says, text from the boss. The boss asks, I heard you called a customer dumb. Is this true? And the employee responds, no. I asked the customer, are you dumb?
I saw that. Yeah. I did not tell them.
You don't want to get in situations like that. You want to have, it should be very clear that you shouldn't even ask customers whether they're dumb, right? It should be very clear on the way that we treat employees and how we deal with people and customers and everyone, from the person right at the bottom all the way to the top.
Yep.
The other one is just complying with local laws, which you've already touched on, right? Ensure your business complies with local licensing, tax, labor, whatever the laws and regulations are that apply to your business, which the only way you're going to know that, again, is if you talk to your legal advisors, talk to people who are in that space who can advise you. But it also doesn't have to be necessarily going and approaching them and getting a quote or something or advice. It could be as simple as following them on social media. I've noticed a lot of law firms, a lot of accounting firms, tax firms, they put out guidance and sort of alerts. I've seen Mukiti Advocates does an alert like this has changed in the tax regime, what you should know. So those are good ways that are it's low-hanging fruit, right? All you need to do is just subscribe to a newsletter or some social media platform, and then you constantly get updated on that. And then if you need to know more, if it applies to your business, you can always approach them or someone else. But being on notice and knowing what's happening and what's changing in your business and the laws that affect it, that's super important. That's sort of what I'll talk about in terms of ethics and compliance. I mean, of course, you should consider having internally someone who's monitoring these things. But for a startup, especially where you can only have so many roles, this is an easier way to go about that, at least when you're starting out. Tim, maybe you can talk about communication.
Sure. So I mean, communication is extremely important as a part and parcel of good corporate governance. In any case, you still need to communicate the structures of the corporate governance that you will be implementing in your business. And it's also important in terms of people getting a form of pulse on how the business, having your hand on the pulse of how the business is doing, how everybody is progressing. Imagine a scenario where you join, you're hired for a business into a company, you report. Nobody takes you through an induction. Nobody tells you this is how we do. No one tells you where to sit. So you figure it out by yourself.
Yeah.
And after that, nobody talks to you, tells you what are your goals, what are your, what are your KPIs. And then they come and tell you like 6 months later. They actually don't even tell you. Somebody comes to you 6 months later, they ask you, what have you accomplished so far?
Yeah.
at that point you're like, what was I supposed to accomplish to start with? So that just highlights the importance of regular communication. Communication is an extremely important step in corporate governance. And one way to do it is to have regular check-ins. So this is where you hold regular meetings with everyone involved in the business to discuss progress, challenges, and the next steps. They do not need to be formal, really, but they need to be consistent. It could be every Monday morning we have a farm-wide meeting. We touch base on where everybody is, who is having what challenges, and how best can we progress as a business, and make sure those meetings are actually valuable. It's not, sometimes meetings can get to a point where they're just routine.
Yeah,
there's nothing being accomplished. It's just a routine process.
Yeah.
Ideally, that meeting should be able to add value. Such meetings are consistent. They have to be consistent, but you have to derive action points from them and sort of a way of giving feedback. Like the meetings should add value.
Yeah, it's not meetings that should have been emails.
Exactly. It's not meetings that should have been emails, because such meetings also destroy the effectiveness of communication.
Yeah.
Because people show up just can't wait to be out of here. So you're not there to communicate. You're there to just tick a box, and everybody's so tired. They would rather be somewhere else. The second, other than having regular check-ins and meetings, the second one is having open channels of communication.
Yeah.
Which means that people should be comfortable, should feel free to tell you, to tell the leaders or the managers or the key decision makers if there's anything that they think can be done differently, can be improved, or there's a risk coming. There should be someone to tell you, I can see an iceberg so many miles away. How do we start to prepare for it?
Yeah.
If you're tone deaf and you never have open channels of communication, then you're in problems. And you try to imagine of your business as something as important as flying. If you're a pilot and you're a captain flying, it's unlikely any one of them would take off if maybe, let's say, the first officer tells the captain that one of the engine has an issue. It's unlikely you will decide to fly. But unfortunately for businesses, you could have a junior person tell a more senior person that I think there's a risk here, and they will be ignored. And the consequences tend to show themselves in due course. So it's important to have open channels of communication, which are clear and there's no risk of being victimized.
True.
Whenever you come up with an idea, first of all, you'll not be told your idea is not smart, but then again, that is appreciated, and there's no victimization for having good ideas.
And it sounds like that's both ways, right? So the communication shouldn't just be from the top down saying, this is what we're doing today, go do it. It should also be from the bottom up.
Exactly.
Okay.
So equally, it's important to maintain records. Now, this goes back to a point you've just discussed here around keeping records of decision-making processes.
Yeah.
But even beyond the decision-making processes, there are also essential records that you need to maintain, such as invoices, receipts, your expenditure, who is getting paid, when they were they paid, agreements that relate to the business. And good record keeping is important for a couple of reasons. One of them is legal compliance. Somebody could sue you. An employee could sue you, say that you didn't pay them their dues, or they were poor, wrongly dismissed. But then if you have a record, you have a process of you've maintained the records properly, then you mitigate the legal risk that comes with such things, including other stakeholders in the business. It's important for financial management and compliance, like tax compliance.
Yeah.
If you don't know what expenditures you did, you don't have invoices, how are you going to have a good accounting system? And more importantly for startups, it's important for your fundraising efforts. Because if whoever wants to invest in your business can see a track record of decisions that you've made over and over, and you can explain and you provide good records, then there's confidence that you're actually managing your business well, and it can be tracked.
Correct. And it's also like a muscle that you need to keep exercising, right? If you're
Yes.
not good at record keeping when you're still small,
Mhm.
odds of you getting better at it radically when you're now a huge business and you have all this funding, it's slim. So you might as well, again, start from the beginning, flexing this muscle and being good about record keeping and not keeping it on WhatsApp.
Yes. Not keeping it also. I mean, if you cannot keep records, good records for a $10,000 business, how will you manage when it's $100 million business? It's totally going to be different. In fact, the culture is already broken. Now, it's become a modern practice to have digital backup of records. And ideally, every business should find a way. It doesn't have to be very complicated. Where you have servers or that you can just purchase an external hard disk and a couple of them. Because you see, if one of them, if the main backup is stolen or lost, then
backup for the backup.
You could have a backup for a backup, but ideally it's good to have digital backup for documents and important communication and records.
Okay.
Yeah. So Adrian, happy for you to take us through basic strategic planning.
Sure. So basic strategic planning. So the main one here is having a vision, clear vision, and setting goals to attain that vision. So what's the vision? The vision is where the business wants to be in, let's say, 5 to 10 years, right? You're projecting out and saying 10 years from now, 20 years from now, where do we as a business want to be? So that's very helpful because it provides a direction, right? It's saying this is where we want to go. So how do we go about going there? What's our direction? And also people now know this is the purpose. This is why we're doing what we're doing, because that's where we're heading. So that's the vision. And then you set goals, which are essentially like steps, right? Objectives that the business can take in order to meet that vision. So you say, the vision is, for example, let's say we're an e-commerce brand, right? We help people buy things online, and our vision is to be the premier e-commerce store or outlet in Africa in 10 years. Okay, great. That's a good vision. It's ambitious. It's really, looking into the future. That's what we want to achieve.
Yep.
So now we need to set goals that align with that vision, right? Goals need to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So SMART, right? SMART goals. You'll hear this a lot. Have SMART goals. So a SMART goal in that context would be, we want to increase our sales by 10% by the end of the fiscal year, right? We as the business want to increase all sales by 10% by the end of the fiscal year. That's specific in that we're very specific. We're saying 10% sales by a certain date. It's measurable because you can measure from the beginning to the end of the fiscal year if you actually met that goal. It's perhaps achievable. I mean, maybe for an earlier business, 10% growth might not be as hard for a more developed business, but let's assume 10% is achievable for where you are. It's relevant because it ties in specifically to the vision. The vision is to be the premier e-commerce brand. To get there, we need to make more sales. So this ties right into the vision. And it's time-bound. It's literally, we've said by this date, we need to have achieved this thing. So trying to have goals that are smart and having a clear vision are very important because they inspire and motivate the team. Everyone knows that we're all pulling in the same direction. We know what we're trying to achieve. So we're all heading in that direction. It also attracts investors and partners that are aligned with that vision. So if someone wants to be part of the premier e-commerce brand in Africa, they're probably going to want to work with you. It also, something Collins mentioned in a few episodes ago, it also removes the people who are not aligned with your vision, right? He talked about a culture reset in his company, and then people who were not aligned with that vision sort of fell away. But that's all for the best, right? Because you don't want people in the camp who are not for you or who are not for the long-term vision, because it won't work out in one way or another. And it also just helps in decision-making. We've talked about the decision-making process and documenting it, but sometimes it's not just about documenting the decision. It's how do we arrive at the right decision before we even document it? And oftentimes you look at our North Star is, this is our vision. This is where we want to go. So let's reference that in making this decision. Is this getting us closer to where we want to go? And then you can tell whether it's what decision to make in that instance. So that's having a vision that's clear and sort of ambitious. and everyone knows what it is. It's not just on the walls, but it's in the hearts and minds of people on a day-to-day. It's sort of part of the culture, as well as setting goals to attain that vision. And then having an action plan, sort of breaking that down into actionable steps. So years 1 to 2, this is what we should do. Years 3 to 4, this is where we should be. Yep. And again, tracking that, because if you're not measuring it, you're not managing it.
Exactly.
I think that's all I'll say in terms of visions and goals. I'll run through some of these other ones pretty quickly. I'll start maybe with conflict resolution. Having a conflict resolution process is super important, because you don't want to have to figure this out when there's a conflict. So before there's ever a conflict that arises, have a very basic, straightforward process for resolving disputes. So it doesn't have to be the most sort of complex thing. It could just be as simple as, if there's ever a dispute, we meet in this conference room and those people don't leave until we've had a resolution, or something. Something at least you've given thought, and you've expressed to everyone how conflicts and disputes are managed. As opposed to, Tim and I have a dispute and Steve says, well, the way we do it is we meet at Adrian's place to do this and that. So it's like, okay, well, even the dispute resolution mechanism already seems sort of biased in it. So people won't accept it in that way. You need to sort of have this right from the beginning, and just make sure that people understand what it is. So it could be that setting, it could be having a third-party mediator or a neutral third party, whatever it is. Tim, maybe you can run us through the next few.
So another thing that is important in terms of corporate governance is succession planning. I think sometimes businesses, and especially founders, get caught up in working so hard to build a business that you don't start to imagine the business outside yourself. Like, you get so tied up to the business that you don't start to build what could happen if I was, because you could even imagine it this way: if for whatever reason I was to be in a position where I cannot expend much time as I do in the business, make as many decisions as I can, what would happen to the business? And if the business means something, you'd want it to succeed and survive your generation and more, then I think it's always important to have some form of succession planning. And it could include identifying what kind of leaders you want into the future, or what kind of people you would be making decisions in the future, and starting to sort of mentor and train them through the business as time goes by. And you could even have a written down structure of how succession planning needs to look like, who needs to take what responsibilities by what time. They don't have to be specifically tied to a particular person in the firm of the business. It could be tied to what particular characteristic or behavior traits are we looking at somebody who is able to take up the business and take it to the next level. And those systems and processes, right? Because we talked about, if you're the CEO and you've just started the business, you often are doing everything. But 5 years in, you shouldn't be doing everything. There should be systems, there should be people and policies and ways to do things. You should be more concerned about the sustainability of the systems and efficiencies and changing them, as opposed to be doing everything. If 5 years into your business, they still have to consult you to decide how many kilos of sugar to buy, you're already having problems at that stage. Then you also need to have simple performance matrices for your business. I mean, we discussed decision making and who is responsible for what decisions, but equally define the key performance indicators of every person in the team. It could be the CEO, it could be the board, it could be the senior management, it could be support staff. Everybody needs to have clear key performance indicators which are measurable. Going back to what you've just explained about SMART goals, which are measurable. We can have a meeting and decide whether you've met your goals, your performance key performance indicators have been achieved. And it helps in reviewing the performance of the business as well as the performance of everybody within the structure of the business. And awesome. Again, just to add on what you say a couple of times, if it's not being measured out, there's no way of knowing how to manage it. So
100%. I'll just talk quickly about a couple more things. One is customer relations, right? Super important. Your customers are the people who are supporting your business on a day-to-day basis, and it wouldn't exist without them. So managing those relationships is very important. So one way you can do that is soliciting feedback from your customers. It could be as simple as surveys. It could be direct conversations with a customer, say, how was our service today? How is the product? It could be on social media. You could engage them and ask them for feedback that way. But finding ways to understand and address customers' needs, that's crucial, right? For the governance, but also for the long-term success. Because if customers' needs are not being met, then often they'll go somewhere else. Also, documenting and responding to complaints. So customer calls in and has an issue with a specific part of the product. It's good to document that and note it down so that we keep track of what are the issues that keep coming up. It may be a one-off thing and there's nothing really to do about it. There's nothing really we could have done. But it may, if you start getting 20 calls about a very specific thing within your business or your product or your service, then perhaps there's something strategically there that you need to address and try to find out why that's an issue. But again, if you're not keeping track of it, it's hard to remember how many times this thing's been coming up and whether it's an issue that it's a core issue that needs to be managed. Legal awareness. I think we've sort of beaten this drum to death, right? Have written from episode 1, we've been talking about this thing. Have written agreements. Make sure all your agreements are dated and signed. Mm-hmm. Make sure that the agreements don't have to be super complex, but make sure that they outline the terms and responsibilities of each party. Every party should be properly named so that they don't say, well, that's not me who signed, that was someone else. You should store those, record keeping, of course. Mm-hmm. Agreements, everyone should have an agreement. All your partners, all your vendors, your suppliers, your employees, even you as the founder, you should have some sort of agreement with the business. Everyone should have an agreement and it should always be kept so that we always know who is responsible for what. Also, keeping aware of regulatory changes. We sort of talked about that already. Sort of staying on top of what's changing in the world, making sure that your business is constantly in compliance with the law. Last 2, transparency with your stakeholders. We've talked about communication, making sure those lines are open, people are free to communicate, but it's also good to be transparent. Everyone should know what's happening. I mean, within reason. You shouldn't divulge everything, but the people who are in the chain of command, your board, your shareholders, your employees, your stakeholders, key people in that chain should be aware of what's happening. If we're changing the whole strategy of the business, people should know so that they act accordingly. This transparency builds trust. Investors especially, you should be talking to your investors often, telling them what's happening, good or bad, keeping them appraised, because you don't want to show up and tell them 6 months down the line, you've never said anything to them and you're like, oh, there's actually this big issue. You want that culture of trust and transparency. Also, when something does go wrong, they say, you know what, you've been communicating, we know you, you're one of us, we'll work through it, right? It's a lot easier to have that conversation if you've been having that open channel of communication and transparency with people. Also, a focus on sustainability. This is, again, emerging trends in corporate governance, ESG, thinking about the environment, thinking about how, as a business, you are running. Are you sustainable? Are you using eco-friendly practices? How are you sourcing your products and materials? Are you using ethical sourcing? Are you reducing waste in the office? Are you recycling? Are you minimizing your use of water or wastage of water? That type of thing. And having that as part of your brand, part of your culture, part of your mission as a company is super important because it's good for the world, of course, but also it attracts people who are more and more thinking about this issue, right? Eco or conscious customers or consumers who want to know where their products are coming from are more likely to be attracted to your brand than they are to another brand that's not so focused on that. So trying to build that into your business and incorporating sustainability practices, especially early on, so that it's something that you do as you continue to grow as a business. So as we said, this is not an exhaustive list. It's just the things that we've seen and that tend to work. It's very broad. So hopefully it works for your business and it's applicable. But those are our sort of corporate governance tips and tricks for your business. And that's it really for the substance. Let's go into some more fun segments. So Tim, interesting thing of the week. What do you have for us?
Interesting thing of the week for me is the conclusion of the Paralympics 2024.
Right. Okay.
And it's from a business perspective.
Okay.
So on LinkedIn, I saw a post by Deloitte congratulating one of their staff for having won. I think they got a medal in the Paralympics, telling them congratulations. We are very proud of you.
Yeah.
Then I think a day later, I equally saw not a day later. So before that post, I had seen an earlier post by a law firm, DLA Piper.
Okay.
Sharing one of their the staff members, as you go to participate in the Paris Paralympics.
Wow.
We're wishing you well, and go ye and do very well. And that was interesting for me, because it's actually interesting to see that, first of all, where do you get time to train for Olympics, Paralympics or otherwise,
Yeah.
But it's impressive to see that these firms are sort of taking a steps towards ensuring that their staff unlock their potential through and through, whether at work, whether at sports, or whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
And I thought about Kenya, for instance. I hope at one point maybe a Kipchoge will be a corporate lawyer, and after doing a couple of transactions, we are cheering them. Go break world records and all that, because I think human beings tend to be more talented in many ways, and if they're at a workplace, that workplace should be able to champion their ability to even to express themselves and discover their talents and unlock their potential in multiple ways, whether it's potential to be an Olympic athlete, whether it's a potential to, maybe you like singing, maybe you want to be in a band. Yeah, so that was the interesting thing of the week for me. And I thought specifically for Mukiti Advocates, that's something that we'll be very keen on doing, ensuring that every person who is part of our team gets to unlock their full potential in everything that they can, of course, and have the same also contribute to our goals as a firm.
Wow,
yeah,
that's awesome. Allowing people to be their full selves,
exactly,
and to grow that. That's really cool.
And to unlock full potential.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to 10, 15, 20 years from now. They'll find that clip and be like, here's our managing partner. As early as 2024, he said this, and look at how things have played out. I think that would be really cool. So that's a really good one. Thank you. For me, my interesting thing of the week is something I saw in a newsletter on the art of seeking feedback. So it really dovetails well with what we've been talking about, and having open communication channels within the business, but also the importance of seeking feedback and having feedback being a regular thing that you do. So one thing that they talked about was trying to find ways within your business to provide feedback often. So oftentimes in many businesses I've seen or worked in, there's a culture of either it's an annual review or it's a semi-annual review, one or the other. The issue with that always is, that I've seen anyway personally, is there's this huge, what's the word? It becomes such a daunting aspect. So you think about it in January, you're like, oh my gosh, 6 months from now I have that big review and it's going to determine my whole life and all this. Or maybe it's once a year, so you're waiting for that one time in the year when you're going to get all this feedback. And it becomes such a thing that's far away in the future. It's not really something that's active in your day-to-day.
Yeah.
What they recommend in this article is basically to have quick 30-minute feedback sessions every 30 days. So every 30 days, you sit down with someone and you say, this is the feedback. So it's really quick. It's not a huge process that, from top to bottom, it's been orchestrated. And, it's literally just 30 days, let's sit down for 30 minutes max and just talk through what the feedback is. So it's a way to, again, make it a regular occurrence so that when it does happen, it's not such a fear-inducing thing that it's like, oh my God, annual reviews are here. Everyone's so worried. What's going to come out of it? How is it going to affect my job? So that's something I saw. But then it also reminded me of another article I read many years ago. Again, this was about the art of seeking feedback as opposed to giving feedback, which was when you are seeking feedback. Well, one, seek feedback often. So get in the habit of just asking people, for feedback. Can I get feedback on how I did on this project, etc. But that article specifically talked about, if you want to get real good feedback, like really, really good actionable feedback, you need to ask for the feedback in a specific way. So the way to not ask for feedback is to go to someone and say, so Tim, we just finished that big transaction. How did I do? Or how was I? Or how we, because odds are, a lot of the time, people are going to say to you, you did a good job. That was actually pretty good. Thanks. Great. Or, yeah, it was good. It was good. Let's see on the next one. They'll give you something like that. If you want actionable, real feedback, go to the person and say, hey, Tim, we just finished that project. I just wanted to understand, what do you think I could have done better? Are there ways that you think we could have improved this output, or that I could have shown up in a better way for da-da-da? When you preface it as, I want to know ways I can improve, as opposed to, how did I do? it makes it much easier for someone to say, you know what, these are actually the ways I think you could have improved, or you could have done this thing better. And now you have real ways that you can improve your performance, as opposed to the blanket, how did I do? Which is usually going to get you that you did a good job, which is not really actionable. You can't really do much with that, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my interesting thing of the week. It's just about feedback, seeking feedback often, delivering feedback often, and how you phrase it when you seek feedback.
Yeah.
And also not to delay, because I don't want to have an issue in January and you bring it up in December. Because now 12 months have gone by and I've been here doing the wrong thing, or I've grown out of that thing and I no longer do it. And now you're telling me in December, I'm like, okay.
Yeah. That's true. That's a good, interesting thing of the week. The only thing I was thinking about as a lawyer is, when you have these 30 minutes, feedback sessions, every 30 days, I hope they're documented. Because if you have to terminate the employment and then the employee is like, you never told me, there's no record.
Bro, check your WhatsApp. I sent you.
anyway, just thinking about it in terms of the risks.
Okay.
But thank you very much. And for that interesting thing of the week, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. We have run through practical ways in which you can implement corporate governance for your business, from setting the setup structures to mitigating risks, to having smart goals and visions, to tracking how you're implementing the business ideas and the goals, to all the way to focusing on sustainability. We hope that you have learned a thing or two. If you have further questions or you'd want to engage us further, please feel free to comment or reach out to us on the various platforms. We'll be happy to engage you further on the same. This week, please be on the lookout for the weekly challenge, and please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have any questions again, please let us know. Otherwise, thank you for tuning in and see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.